This is part 2 of this model review, where I'm trying to suggest that you might learn some corporate modeling ideas and some ideas of modeling in general, not by um, going line by line through a model, and not by being told this is the correct technique to use. Rather, taking a model, which is very difficult to do. One of my persons in my class told me, I think he was from Texas, I'd rather be sitting on a bed of nails than reviewing somebody's model. And, so how do we look at somebody's model? How do we evaluate it? And at the same time, how do we see, how do we fix something? So in this one, I fixed some of the model a little bit. Perhaps I made it worse. Who knows? I'm going to show you how to clean things up a little bit, how to fix things. The key is how to really structure a corporate analysis. Then we'll discuss the depreciation mistakes. Now, before I discuss this, I think I'm going to talk about the return on invested capital, because I have a feeling I'll lose absolutely everybody when I get to depreciation. This is something I seem to get a little obsessed with. So we'll talk about the return on invested capital issues just a little bit first. Some conceptual issues, as well as some some kind of how do we use it in a model. Then in terms of making the mistakes in depreciation, this model had a dramatic overstatement of depreciation. It looked all fancy, but it was an incredible error. And what happens then is your capex to depreciation is all wrong, your taxes are wrong. If you overstate depreciation, you understate your taxes. On the other way, if you overstate your depreciation, you understate your net operating profit after taxes. And I want to show you 2 different ways to do depreciation, okay? So, why don't we get started? So here's again this model with all these fantastic different pages with this beautiful format that looked so incredibly, sophisticated. The problem is, at the end of the day, we need to discuss some really economic things that are going on. Now, if you have of course, this drives me kind of crazy. I start to think, well, what a ridiculous thing to waste time thinking about. But if you were trying to loan money or invest in the stock of a company that had taxi cabs, I think you would have probably done really badly. If you would have been unfortunate enough, I would feel so sorry for you if you bought some kind of taxi medallion, if you invested in that, because of the famous Uberization, whatever that, so we can give all this money to somebody in California or something. Now, without making a big capital investment. Maybe they did. Okay. I'm not going to get into arguments about it or anything else. I just want to say that you predicting those kind of trends from, we can call it the digital kind of big change, predicting those kind of changes, oh my gosh, how hard is that? I a lot of times talk about surplus capacity, but I think that's what really happens. So here, out of all these things, what I did is I put together some of the sheets that were done, and in the last video, I made a true-false switch. Now, I put a little ABC here, and I pressed Shift alternate C, and maybe I'll try this color instead. This time I said, well, since we have things in column A, we'll include column A. So let's just make a nice little coloring of this. All right. And then, that's a little greener. And then we have some history and some forecast. And now what we should have done is started it with a separate set of history. The history should have not had any projections. And that history should have led us to make some assumptions. And we should have been enormously careful about making assumptions with regard to the pricing of our product in a competitive industry subject to dramatic changes. Then I said, well, I inserted a whole section for depreciation that we're going to discuss because that's a big issue. And then I simply put together the rest of the model. Now, I should just tell you one thing that I should have done, and I just didn't bother. This, because the cash flow was such a simple kind of thing, I think in the projections there was cash flow kind of from operations and then cash flow from financing, and all the cash flow process did here was to take the cash flow and increase the amount of ending cash from the cash flow. Okay, this was the total increase in cash. Here was the beginning cash, and here's the ending cash, and kind of so that cash flow process can be much more complicated. This time it wasn't. And then nicely they had a balance sheet. The rule in the balance sheet is there should be no calculations like this. Everything should be a simple number. Yeah, even, well, okay, that's okay. So there wasn't that bad. I mean, in mechanically that was okay, almost. And do you see this? This sheet is named consolidated, and when I put together, it still had consolidated here, which I find irritating. So we press Control-Alt-C. Sorry about a little bit of this mechanics. My friend said I jump around a little bit too much, and they're absolutely correct. So what you do here is you press this thing called Remove Links in the Same Sheet. Just click on that one, and okay, so now when I'm looking at the various formulas, it took out the sheet names. It actually, I think I limited the amount of rows it works through, so something right at the very bottom might not have the adjustment. Now, of course, up here we have some things that come from a different sheet, and they come from this consolidated revenue sheet, so we can also, while we're at this silly thing, I'll make that a green sheet. And then one more thing. So Control-Alt-C, and this time just click on the color sheet, and we'll have the, you see it comes from the green sheet, of course. Okay, so at least we can see where things come from, kind of. This was a history and then a forecast, and then we'd have to look at those, I suppose. All right, and now let's get to the real meat of the thing. Okay, this was arranging things. I certainly suggest you keep it in the same sheet when you're working on it, if not when you're presenting it. And when we get down to the assets, last time I said, okay, well, it's he computed the return on invested capital just fine, and I was completely wrong. You take EBITDA and you take away the depreciation to get net operating profit. Now this says other income is not part of EBITDA. And that's how he defined EBITDA, which is okay. You can do it however you want. And then there's an effective tax rate that was, part of the calculations, and then we get our NOPAT. Then invested capital. To get invested capital, I have done this a few times, but I think this is an essential part of a model. Not essential, but a good little practice to do, is to put little ones and negative ones next to each account and make sure you can reconcile all of the assets and liabilities So I went through and said, okay, well, equity, well, that's capital. So if we do it on a capital side, that's capital. Borrowings are capital, but cash is like a negative debt, or whatever. It's not really, but and then investments, I think that's -1. We should have put a minus on that one, and then the rest of it is the operations. And if it's an asset, you put it as a +1, and if it's a liability, you put it as a -1 somewhere. The liabilities were above the assets for some reason. Then you make this sum product, and you add up all the balance sheet items and multiply it by the plus or -1, and you do the same thing with the liabilities. And while you're at it, you compute the bridge between enterprise value and equity value that we'll use when we compute historic EV to EBITDA and other things. And they had negative debt, really, because these investments plus the cash balance up here were more than the borrowings. Okay. Now, this is the invested capital, so I just took that invested capital and got the invested capital, and then simply take the average invested capital for the very first year. It doesn't really work, but the rest of it is just fine. And then you get your return on invested capital. And here it was going 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, and then it doesn't just go up to 29, like I said, it goes up to 43%. Now, then you have to get very philosophical. I remember I argued with somebody who gave me this model. He said, oh, that's okay. There's operating leverage. We're going to grow our business, and we have some fixed cost, so we're going to take advantage of operating leverage. I don't believe that for a minute. Sorry. I think this is the price of the product. This says you're going to have some monopoly pricing, and you can charge really high prices for advertising in a market that's getting incredibly competitive, and Google's coming in and everything else. So, whatever. Then you can do the same thing. You get to other income, and you compare that. You take that after tax, just like NOPAT. And then you compare that to the investments, and I added the cash investments to that, and you can kind of dissect the company. So here's the kind of assumption they had for the return on other investments compared to the return on invested capital. And then you can compare this to the debt cost and even equity cost. That's really what you're doing in the model at the end of the day. Now, I put some depreciation here, and I should have taken a net plant depreciation rate. Well, that went way up, and the gross plant depreciation rate, that didn't go up. So maybe that's okay, but look at this net plant depreciation rate. This is just taking the depreciation divided by net plant. It went from 15% to 33%. There's a mistake here. There's a mechanical mistake. And then we put our CapEx in, which was really, really high to support the EBITDA growth. That's kind of the problem with the company. And then you're assuming, not that unreasonable, but these CapEx are less than depreciation. Now, these CapEx are less than depreciation, perhaps because depreciation has not been measured correctly. Then EBITDA starts to go really high. But this EBITDA is increasing when they had some big increases in EBITDA, but these were supported by major investments. This EBITDA increase, and then why did it come, this growth rate in EBITDA? Well, the EBITDA margin kind of went up, but not that dramatically. I guess it, so you maybe, okay, you could actually make an argument for this scenario, almost. Where was let's just look at a couple of things. Here was our EBITDA. Our EBITDA was supposed to, in 2016 and 17, 5,000 or 6,000. And I went to some website, and the actual, I've got cash flow. Let's put it on profit and loss. For 2016, gross sales were 1 billion, and profit before earnings, before EBIDT, 79.53. That's what it was. Was it really that? Depreciation was 69. Now, I'm almost thinking, do I have the wrong company? I don't think I do. That's a pretty big difference. That's an enormous difference. That's the type of thing to be afraid of, and I wish I had an easy answer. I wish I could say, Excel, you just can't, you got to fix kind of the Excel and do all of that. Well, that's the problem. So, as soon as you see lesson number 1, and we made this graph in the last video, I think, and lesson number 1 is, and lesson number 10 and everything else, and is compute return on invested capital pretty carefully, and if you have something like this, be really careful. Really. You better have a really, really good explanation of why they can price their products higher than other people, why other people won't come into the market, why other people can't be as efficient as them, and why there won't be a whole bunch of surplus capacity if everybody can make this kind of return, blah, blah, blah. That is everything. Now, let's talk about, I think I have covered most of the subjects I said I was going to do, but now I'm going to talk about depreciation, because here is the error that they made with depreciation. And I'm going to talk about the implications of this error and how to really fix it. Number 1, there was this whole page of depreciation. How about I'll make this page some purple color, okay, and I'll make this page some other light blue color. It'll be really hard to see in this page some other orange color, okay. Now, when we sorry about this, Shift Alternate C, and I am actually gonna not waste your time. Now, some of the gross assets came from another sheet, okay, and they just a minute, I'm looking for the CapEx. No, they just subtracted the gross assets. It's the CapEx. It seems that, they made it, what happened here? Okay, that was nothing. They kind of looked how many machines they have to get and put the pricing of the machines. It seemed really detailed. What a lot of work. And then they put in the depreciation, they put this thing that you see in financial statements all the time. How much what are the additions, what are the balances? Oh no, this is even CapEx. I'm looking. I should look at this depreciation sheet. They put the gross block, the additions, depreciations, and all that, and did it each year. Oh my gosh, what a lot of work! Too bad it's all crap, because there were no retirements. That's why the depreciation was so funky. Here's what their depreciation was. Shift Control E, okay? And this depreciation kept going up and up and up, and it's because something kind of logical. They took a depreciation rate, and where's the depreciation rate on the gross plant? And they just said, okay, we're going to multiply that by the gross plant. That's how depreciation is really calculated. So how wonderful is that? That's what you really should do. All right, but that gross plant doesn't always increase. It always it decreases as well. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to reflect the retirements of assets. I've said this a lot of different times, and it's a pain to really do it. Now, they also, okay, we should really have done this. I think Shift, Control, right arrow, and then I'm just going to go down, and I'm just going to make a little conditional formatting with the true falses, and I'm going to move it to the left and all of that, and I'm going to put all of the history in a different, very lightly shaded color. So step 1 is you move it to the left. Step 2 is you go to conditional formatting, you put a new rule, you use a formula, and the formula you use can be this true, and you don't even have to, the only thing you have to do is press the F4 once, and then you go to format, and you say, let's take a fill color, let's use one of the lighter colors we can find. How about this light gray right at the top? And now we show what's kind of the history. And I guess, well, okay, I took out the little thing at the top, all right. I don't know if I can get it to go on the bottom. That's not very important, is it? Now, so first, if you're really going to make the depreciation, put the plant balance, get all the history together first. The historic and net plant, gross plant, accumulated depreciation, historic depreciation expense. Now, I'm going to skip from what they did, and if we can look at this net plant depreciation, and then for all of the assumptions, I think it's kind of a good little thing to, at the side, put the average. And I just put an average if. And the average if says, take this true-false line and make the average when this true-false line is true, then take the same line. And you can do the same thing with you can use sum if, average if, it wouldn't even matter. Take the year and take the last year. So I said, okay, well, let's just make a little formula here. This would be a typical corporate modeling formula where you say, okay, let's take, if it's the history, just use the actual one. And then if it's the forecast, I said, well, we're just going to use the last period. So I'll just use the last period for the net plant depreciation rate. Then we get our CapEx, and then we put a little net plant balance in here. Okay, maybe I should have moved this up, and this is really kind of like this. What a waste of time. Sorry about this. Oh my gosh, don't waste too much time doing this crap, Excuse me for that. All right, and then we see what our opening balance is. We add the CapEx, and then when you compute the depreciation, get it from below, but the depreciation rate, this depreciation rate has to be on the opening balance to avoid a circular reference. So if you're going to use this net plant balance, take the historic depreciation to divide it by the opening balance, not the closing balance. And then you can just kind of track the net plant and look at the depreciation. This is total depreciation, excuse me. So this is, I'm going to call this the gross plant method. So they essentially took the gross plant without any depreciation deductions, retirement deductions, and multiplied it by the correct real depreciation rate. You compute the net plant depreciation rate, and you get this alternative depreciation, and look at the difference. Look at the difference. In this last year, we've almost got twice as much depreciation from not doing it correctly. Now, if you're going to do it really precisely, here's the way to do it. the way to do it is, number one, to split it between existing plant and new plant. So this is the, so I'm going to put retirement. Okay, and then we first, we look at our existing plant first, and then we take an opening balance. But notice there has to be a retirement. If you don't have a retirement here, the whole thing is crap. And by the time you get, if you're just taking the existing plant, this plant gets depreciated away, like I am depreciating away. My body and my mind are depreciating away. Maybe that's why I'm talking about depreciation. Then to get the depreciation rate, you can just take a lifetime of the assets. I assumed it was 12. I made it a round number. And we just, I again, multiplied this by the opening balance, assuming that the depreciation comes in at the end. Okay? Then you can compute the accumulated depreciation separately. You don't really have to do this, but when you compute accumulated depreciation, from an accounting standpoint, I'm not going through too much accounting, the retirement of assets is a reduction in the accumulated depreciation, just like it is in the gross plant. That's why in this net plant, nice simple method, you didn't have to do anything. Okay, and then so we have the depreciation on the existing plant that's kind of going down. And then we have the new plant. And for the new plant, that's where you put all the CapEx in. And when you put the CapEx in, you just have to kind of do the same thing, get the retirements on the new plant. Here's the problem with that. I didn't have any yet because it was 12 years out until we make a retirement on this first plant. There was a sale, so had a negative number here. And then we get the depreciation on the new plant, and then we can get the accumulated depreciation on the new plant, so it looks a lot longer, and then we get our total depreciation, which is it better be the one up here, this 108. That's good. So this is our, and I'm going to move it a little bit. Okay, whoops, oh, that was stupid. All right, and then I hope you're not, oh, God. And that's the depreciation. Now it turns out that the interesting part for me is that this depreciation, when you do things really, really carefully, doesn't give you the same as the net plant depreciation, because of all sorts of things going on with growth rates and CapEx in the past and CapEx in the future. Depreciation, if you think about it, if you would just let all your assets deteriorate like you're one person like I am, by the time I'm getting really old, my net depreciation rate is really high because my net plant is almost zero and I'm just depreciating the last couple of years. Okay, so that's really high. That rate changes, and if you have different growth rates and all that, that's why if you really want to get precise, and especially if you're doing a model for the inside of your company, you better do it something like this. You can put the depreciation with all sorts of different categories. And then, so then I compare the comparison of depreciation methods. Here, okay, and it's maybe I feel like I'm a little bit obsessed with this, but the depreciation method, look, this is kind of a realistic example. We get a 20% difference. Now, what's the implication of this 20% difference? What's the implication of all this? So what I did here was I made a little drop-down box that says we can use the original model, we can use the net plant method, or we could use the detailed method, which is this last method. And when you do that, you get a different, I assume, now you get a different invested capital, and you get a different return on invested capital. Now, I put the scenario number, this is the depreciation scenario. And then I said, okay, well, let's also, this is pretty bad. I should do this for all these. Suppose I better make this one a little wider in the front. We have these three methods. Now this is the code number from the index function. So down here I said, okay, well, our applied number is the index of this one, and the index is from the other sheet. The index is from the graph of actual projected sheet. So we're applying a different depreciation method depending on the drop-down box, and that drop-down box depends on this number. So I said, let's just type 1, 2, 3 and get our return on invested capital. I think if you press Control 1 and do this number and custom and put 3 semicolons in, is that right? It's kind of stupid to do, but when I was, I'll do it again. I don't know if I can find it. I'm not good at that stuff. Okay, this compares the differences. Now, if we look at our NOPAT, that was in the return on invested capital, there's a big difference in this last year. The detailed depreciation expense gives you a much higher NOPAT than the modeled depreciation expense. And in terms of return on invested capital, it's kind of interesting because what happens is it's eventually, if you have a whole lot more depreciation, your invested capital goes down, but your income is going up. So in the first couple of years, this model depreciation kind of understated the return on invested capital, okay, compared to this one. Not dramatic. Look at the, I guess, 28%, 20 versus 26%, 31, and then it kind of balanced out by the end. In fact, it almost reversed because of the depreciation reducing the net assets. Now, the NOPAT is a different story. And if you're going to apply this formula, I'm going to apply this formula. Now, I think this formula is wrong. And I'm going to go step by step by step. There's that wonderful McKinsey book. And that McKinsey book talks about shareholder value and capitalism and all this stuff. But the big point is, don't overestimate return on invested capital. Don't think people are so smart that they can have competitive advantages when they really don't, when their business is getting Uberized. 1 minus G over ROIC divided by WACC. It doesn't work. Minus G. And I shouldn't have put an equal sign in here, should I? That, if you're going to apply that formula to get the terminal value, you say that times NOPAT equals enterprise value. If you're going to use that formula and apply it to if you used this model depreciation, you'd be understating the value by a big amount, I think. That's a pretty big percent difference, isn't it? Just from the depreciation being wrong. Okay, well, 15%. So okay, and then the other thing you're going to be doing wrong is when you compute this crucial thing that I think is absolutely essential to kind of get right, and that's our capex to depreciation. Because if we have right now, did you see that last year it has 144%, which sounds like we have a lot of capex. When we did it with the model depreciation, we only had 88%. It also shows you how you can do this. It was 170% here, 144%. This is a key number in the terminal value, an absolutely crucial number. So I hope by looking at this, you think, I have to be careful with depreciation, and I better not have absurd numbers on return on invested capital without explaining things because, and I really do think this is correct, oops, wrong one, because then I'm going to get things wrong like this. And then I'm going to estimate a stock price that could be 140 or something, or 130, when the actual stock price down here is not surprising that it's kind of come down and stayed down at 75, and probably that's overvalued. Okay, so I guess I can. That must be the Bombay Stock Exchange. Okay, so enough of that. And the next, I'm going to make one more video on this and talk about the DCF, because I'm kind of obsessed about that one too, and obsessed about the modeling practices. Okay, enough of this video, and I'm turning it off.